Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. Want to take a quick look at Bitcoin, bring an update just kind of going into the week. Want to point out some important things to watch here as Bitcoin approaches this 7,800 number. And after a couple of days of consolidation, you can see here we've had a pretty nice move yesterday trying to break out of this little bit of a range that we were in. Very choppy range, and we'll take a look at that when we take a deep dive at the charts. And the story in the altcoin market continues to be the same. They are just underperforming Bitcoin significantly. And you can see here, just taking a quick look at the Bitcoin dominance number here, I have Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the all others categories highlighted. And you can see here, Bitcoin dominance has now crossed that 46% number here. And so over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a continued rise in Bitcoin as it had that breakout out of that inverse head and shoulder pattern. And this now is above the March-April highs that we saw. Bitcoin dominance back here peaked right around that 45% number. So continuing to move higher here as the alt correction continues versus BTC. There's always going to be a handful of names that are certainly moving higher, and that's going to be the case in any market condition, but for the most part the alts have certainly been lagging. And we'll take a quick look at some of the charts. Not pretty, but first looking at Bitcoin. And so it was a pretty choppy consolidation, very healthy looking from the daily chart perspective. You can see once we broke out of this neckline from this inverse head and shoulder pattern, we basically had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days of just this kind of choppy consolidation action here, and it formed a pretty narrow range. I mean, relatively speaking, 7,200 was ultimately the floor, and then 7,500 was really that number that it just could not close above on the shorter time frames. We finally saw that breakout happen yesterday, but not without some choppy, turbulent action. And so let's take a quick look at the bigger picture, and then we'll deep dive into some of the shorter term time frames. There's a couple of important things I want to point out going into this week here. I'm going to hide the volume here real quick just to kind of clean up the chart. First, on the weekly chart here, so you can see we had this pullback, we had this double bottom right around that $5,800 mark, and we had that rally. A couple weeks ago I said this is going to be an important week. Was this a higher low? It certainly was. Last week was a very nice follow through week. Pulling the volume back in, you can see here volume was well above average. Beautiful breakout week, showing some great continuation off of the bottom here. And so from that perspective, things look positive. You can see we just started a new week, and as I record this, we're in the green, but I do remain cautious here for a couple of reasons. Going back to the daily chart here, there's a couple of things to note. You guys got to remember, on this inverse head and shoulder pattern, you could do a measured move, and my target was between 7,500 and 7,700, and that was this little box in and around here. And we're still sitting within that range, and we're approaching a key resistance level. So those are the areas I want to keep an eye on here. First off is the prior resistance levels here, that prior swing high we saw. We're basically right at those levels. Doesn't mean it can't go higher, but just make note that that is a resistance point that we are approaching. And then above that, you know, there's the psychological 8K number, which is a little bit of a resistance zone here. If you go back in time a little bit further, you can see this swing low here on May 17th and 18th was right around that 8K number before it finally broke down and gave way to another leg down. And so this little zone here should certainly be watched. This is a little bit of a resistance zone that we are approaching. If it pushes higher and continues to just march along, then the next target I'm looking for is around that $8,400 mark. And so that's going to be right around this swing high here. I think it would pause just below that. So around 8,400 is the number I'm looking for if this continues to move higher. But I am cautious near term in terms of another leg higher, just because the 10 EMA is catching up quickly, but it's still down here at 7,200. And just keep in mind, guys, longer term, this move looks very healthy. The daily chart looks very healthy. So I'm talking a little bit more shorter term, right? A pullback would be normal, but I'm getting cautious as we approach here, just because, one, we're approaching this little bit of a resistance zone, and two, if I pull in the RSI here, let me hide the volume again, you can see the RSI on the daily chart is now hitting that 70 mark. And historically, for Bitcoin at least, some of the other names can go much higher, but for Bitcoin, here in the recent past, that's been the place where it tends to see a little bit of a pause once it hits that 70. I have this bull momentum index that's hidden right now, but This is also hitting 100, and that's showing some near-term overbought conditions when it hits that high of a number. And so those are just things I'm paying attention to. They're not necessarily sell signals, but they are a little bit of a warning sign. And I'm not so inclined to chase breakouts at these levels if I wasn't already in, just because I think it's a little bit higher risk here. So zooming in, looking at the shorter time frames here, there's a couple of things that I want to point out just to be aware of. Now, again, I don't want to sound overly bearish. I'm just taking a little bit more of a cautionary approach here. Looking at the 4-hour RSI, you can see clearly there's been a little bit of a divergence showing up as the price continues higher. That just signifies a loss of momentum as this move continues to go higher. So could it go higher? Yes, but it just starts to show you that, hey, this is starting to lose momentum. Remember, RSI is a leading indicator. It's a momentum indicator, and it's showing that the momentum is starting to wane a little bit as this price action continues to the upside. Now, zooming in even further here on this 4-hour chart, you can see since that little breakout we're forming a little bit of a symmetrical pattern. This is a big outside bar, and these are all inside bars within this. So looking at 77.92 down to around 76.20, and within that, just a little bit of a flag formation happening. If it breaks higher, you could see another leg up, maybe to that 8K psychological mark. But I'm just keeping an eye on this here as this momentum starts to wane, and a break below that 7,600. If it fails to hold this most recent move higher, then that could be an early signal that, hey, maybe the daily chart is ready to see a little bit more deeper of a correction, a pullback, if you will. I'm not expecting a huge leg down. We'll take it one day at a time. I'm not saying we're going to give up this 6,400, 6,800 breakouts and come all the way back down, but on the daily chart, it would make sense to see a little bit more of a pullback than we saw back here. But just looking at the action yesterday, I mean, I was watching this here, and it was pretty wild, and it just continues to be within this choppy range. You see these big fake outs you had here, 1-hour candle that just completely reversed on big volume too. I mean, if you pull the volume back in, this is just massive volume swings. I mean, you go in 1 hour from 7,700 all the way down to 72.71 on the following hour, and so just very choppy. But 7,200 just continues to prove to be that near-term support level. And then we saw it again yesterday. We had this nice little rally, was finally starting to close above 7,500. It was looking pretty good. And then we had this fake out attempt, big pullback within 15 minutes. If I pull that 5-minute chart in here, you can see that that was just a big pullback here. Where is it? Here it is. And so you can see that, just kind of taking a quick granular look. You had a nice fake out. Took it to almost 7,600, and then 15 minutes later you were down here at 73.40, and so just very volatile action. But that's near term. That's kind of, if you're looking at that time frame, if you're doing quick trades along those, it was certainly tough from that perspective, just because of how choppy it's been. But again, going back to the 4-hour and even the daily chart, it still looks positive all around, and we just continue to march higher. So it's been choppy, no doubt, but we'll see if we can break out of this range here over this week, over the next coming days. If not, maybe we see that little bit of a quick pullback, and then that'll relieve some of these technicals and set up for another leg higher. Let's take a quick look at the alts before we wrap this up. Very quickly, Ethereum first. You can see the daily chart just continues to lag versus BTC here, and this represents, well, most of the other alts, some of them much worse than Ethereum, but still all around the picture is just not bullish yet. But they're certainly hitting some oversold levels here on the daily, so I'm paying attention. We're not seeing any bullish divergence yet, but you got to start paying attention as they start to get very extended. I'm going to be looking for some signs of potential reversal in the alts across the board, but right now certainly not looking good here. Another couple of names to take a quick look at. Icon, you can see Icon, this slide continues. We have these small rallies, but none of them have been sustained. Clearly just a series of lower lows and lower highs in Icon. Neo setting up here potentially for a break down further on the USD pair, but looking at the BTC pair here first, these are the type of signals that I want to start looking for here, right? You see these new lows, lower lows, RSI starting to diverge a little bit. Doesn't mean it's the bottom or the low, but you start looking for those type of things, and then start looking for signs of reversal action showing up, some sort of reversal patterns. Looking at Neo Dollar here, You can see we're in this little symmetrical pattern here at these lows. Now, technically, this is a bear pennant because it's following a impulse move lower, and you're starting to coil up here and tighten up and get narrow. And so I'm watching this here. A break below $30 is not going to be positive. It'll look like a little bit of a double top here as well, but this is technically a bear pennant, so a break of that would not be positive. A break above 40 would signal a break out of this pattern, and would also signal a breakout of this near-term horizontal price resistance that I've been watching. So this one's starting to really tighten up here, one to keep an eye on. If it can break out of this downslide on the BTC side, then maybe that'll signal some move higher. But right now, caution should remain on the alts. They're certainly lagging significantly and showing no signs of strength across the board. And one more, EOS did break down. It rallied right into resistance here. You can see here a couple of days ago we had this break below support. We rallied, look where it hit. Support now becomes resistance, and then here we are continuing to head lower versus Bitcoin. So not fun if you've been holding these names, but just kind of wanted to signal that across the board, Bitcoin continues to be the best place to be for now as that dominance number continues to climb. But I will be paying attention for some potential signs of reversals versus Bitcoin as some of these names are starting to hit these washed out levels here in the near term. So that's going to be it for today, guys. I will be posting a link for a live stream tomorrow sometime, and so look out for that. Appreciate you guys watching. Appreciate the likes and the subscribes. And until next time, happy trading.